Welcome to Back to the Father, a show about the journey of life focused on our final end, which is God Himself, our loving Father. And now, here's your host, Dave Palmer.
Well, hello and welcome everybody to the reboot of Back to the Father, a production of the Guadalupe Radio Network. We are back. The rumors of our death are largely exaggerated, as Mark Twain said, but we were the ones that perpetuated those rumors, and we said that we thought that this show was over, but we are back. It's April 28th, 2023, and I'll tell you about the other folks in studio with me here in just a moment. This broadcast is going across the social media platforms of the Guadalupe Radio Network on YouTube and Facebook and Twitter. So if you are on one of those, we welcome you, and we hope you will find this to be a worthwhile hour of your time. And we're going to endeavor to do that, to make it a worthwhile hour of your time. My name is Dave Palmer, and I am a aspiring Thomist. I have benefited greatly from the teachings of St. Thomas Aquinas. I've been studying them for about 15 years and teaching them for about 10 years, mostly to high school students, which hopefully will encourage you, because if I can teach it to high school students, I can hopefully teach it to people of any age, and they do tend to really enjoy it a lot. The show is called Back to the Father because it is about our journey through life from God and back to God, and all the ways that God draws us back through His goodness and through what we call teleology, directing all things to our proper end. And God desires for us to be with Him in heaven in beatitude. And if we accomplish our goal and we run the race and we live virtuously, that's exactly what's going to happen to us at the end of time. All right, in studio, I have two, permanent guests, you could say, co-host guests, and one of them is Sissel Anderson, and she serves as our North Texas assistant here in the North Texas office of the Guadalupe Radio Network. And I want to thank her because almost all the behind-the-scenes work that was done as far as the studio, the graphics, the emails, pretty much everything other than the content of the show has been done by her. So thank you very much, Sissel. I really appreciate it very much.
You're welcome. It's a lot of fun. It's always doing a live stream like this is always exciting because there's a lot more elements to watch out for. But hopefully everyone's enjoying the slightly new setup we have in our temporary studio. Enjoyed it, yeah. And we also have some cool camera shots, I think.
Yeah, and it's going to be changing and adjusting, and you'll see new elements as we go along. This program is going to be broadcast every Friday at 1 o'clock Central Time live. Many of you are probably watching the recording of this, which is awesome. We appreciate it as well. So thank you, Sissel. I also want to thank GRN Leadership, because I tried to pull the plug on this show a couple of months ago, and leadership like Sammy and Richard and Toya said, no, I think this is a worthwhile show. I think our listeners would enjoy learning Thomistic philosophy, and so I thank them for their confidence in what we are doing and also giving us the platform to broadcast this. I want to thank William Kirkendall. He is our high school intern, homeschool student, and I've said this before, but when I was his age, when I was 17 years old, it would have absolutely terrified me to sit with a couple of adults and talk about a pretty deep topic for an hour, not only just, between the three of us, but being broadcast. So, William, thanks for being on the program, and I think you're very courageous to do what you're doing.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, when I was in my early 30s, I may have told you this, I was given an opportunity to go on a radio show in Jackson, Mississippi. It was right around the time that Mother Teresa died, and the host, Thurman Boykin, wanted somebody to talk about Catholicism. And he said, Dave, you're a Catholic. You're the only Catholic I know. Why don't you come out of the air with me? And I had to tell him at the time, no, because I didn't know enough about my faith to feel confident going on the radio and talking about Catholicism. So that was in my 30s, and here you are, in your teenage years. So I really do appreciate very much. I also want to thank you, dear listener, and viewer, for tuning in and giving us an hour of your time on Fridays. We hope you'll find it worthwhile. The challenge of a show like this is to take a deep topic, like the Summa Theologia, Friedrich Nietzsche that we'll be talking about, and making it interesting, compelling, something that you'd like to comment about, something that you'd want to interact about. So that's the goal, and we try to make it as light as possible, but not, goofy or flippant. So anyways, if we strike that balance, then we're doing our job. Yesterday, an email was sent out to the entire GRN network, letting us know about this show. Many of you did respond, and so I know a lot of people are watching this for the first time. So if you're brand new to the show, I want to welcome you and thank you for being here. And I also want to tell you that this is a show where we thrive on interaction from the audience, okay? You can, probably the easiest thing for you to do would be to comment on whatever social media site you're on, Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter. Just make a comment there. Sissel is keeping an eye on it, and when you comment, she will let me know what you said, and we'll comment on your comments. So it is very interactive. You're not bugging us by interacting. That's exactly what we want you to do. We also have a phone number. If you'd like to call in, it's fun to hear your voice as well. Sissel will be watching the phone. That phone number to call in and be on the air with us is 877-757-9424. 877-757-9424. I will say, though, the way the program is going to be formatted is that I'm going to give you some basic information, some information about St. Thomas Aquinas, the Summa, human nature in the first segment. The second segment, we'll be talking primarily about the philosophy of Friedrich Nietzsche. And then in the third segment, we're going to open it up, and Sissel and William will kind of give their thoughts and their comments, what has been taught so far. And that would probably be the best time to call in, although we won't, ignore you if you want to call in during the first couple of segments, okay? Friedrich Nietzsche, who we'll be talking about in the segment, 19th century existentialist, German, atheist, philosopher. He's the one famous for, or infamously, saying God is dead. Okay, what did he mean by that? What do you mean by saying God is dead? He's the one that created the whole idea of the Superman. In fact, I think that the comic hero, the Superman, was based on Friedrich Nietzsche. To power was very interesting as well. William and I were talking before we got on the air, and he said that William was talking to his dad, and his dad said something about, he had an influence on the rise of National Socialism in Germany and Hitler. And a lot of people say that's definitely true. In fact, it's I think a historical fact that Nietzsche's sister was a Nazi sympathizer, and she's the one that after Nietzsche died, kind of compiled all his books, and so I think she may have kind of pushed that angle of it, but many people believe that Nietzsche himself would not have been a Nazi. He died in 1900, so he really was not around in the time that the Nazis were coming into power as well. I want to talk a little bit about zeitgeist. Y'all ever heard that word, zeitgeist? I love that word.
I use that in my everyday language. I mean, personally.
No, you don't. Yeah, I mean, you ever heard of, okay, I'll give you, you never heard of the zeitgeist. Okay.
Well, maybe.
Okay, well, you're about to. Okay. A zeitgeist is a defining spirit or mood of a particular period of history, as shown by the ideas and beliefs of the time. Okay, so I want to ask you, based on that definition, and hold off on this thought, and if you're out there watching us, what is the zeitgeist of this age? Okay, if it's the defining spirit or mood of a particular period of history as shown by the ideas or beliefs of the time, what is our zeitgeist right now? And the reason I bring that up is that Friedrich Nietzsche lived in the second half of the 19th century. Okay, he was born in like 1844, he died in 1900, so the second half of the 19th century. And this was kind of a confusing time because you had centuries before that, the Renaissance. Most people place the Renaissance in the 14th to 17th centuries, and that was followed by the Enlightenment, which was the late 17th century to about 1815. You had a Romantic period of 1798 to 1837, and then a period of realism. Okay, and all these followed what we call the Age of Christendom, okay, where the Christian faith was dominant. And that whole Christendom age basically apexed in the 13th century when St. Thomas Aquinas lived. And then after St. Thomas Aquinas died, you had everything kind of unraveling. Of course, you had the Protestant Reformation, and you had the Renaissance and the Age of Enlightenment, the Age of Reason and Realism. And so Friedrich Nietzsche lived in a time after all this where he was trying to figure out what is the zeitgeist of our age? What is going on, okay? And that's where he started talking about God being dead. And as I said, it wasn't really a celebration of his atheism. It was more of a confusion about what do we do now, okay? Now that God is dead, so to speak, in his mind at least, what do we do with ourselves, okay? And that's an interesting question, because if God is dead, and we know he isn't, what's left with humanity? And that's what Nietzsche was trying to say. Okay, now that we've killed God, what do we do? Okay, so that's it.
So I have a couple of people are commenting and giving what they think. Can you say the word one more time? Because I'm never going to remember this
zeitgeist.
word. Zeitgeist.
Yeah, zeitgeist.
So I've got a couple of people. We have some returning friends from when we've done the show before. Forrest is back, and he's saying worship of self is what he thinks it is. And then Carla is saying age of gender neutrality.
Wow.
And then also we have Annabelle saying transgender ideology.
That's what I was thinking too.
Okay,
so that was Williams as well.
Yeah, those are all great comments, and I tend to agree. And I'll give you my thoughts on the zeitgeist of the age, and I think it ties into everything that all three of those just said. Is we have come to a point where communication is instantaneous, and everybody pretty much knows everything that's going on at every time, and also, as evidenced by what we're doing right now, we have an ability, every single person on the globe, to broadcast ourselves to the entire world instantly. Okay, so I think in my opinion, it's an age of narcissism. So it's an age of trying to get noticed, because we all want attention. I mean, by nature. I mean, who doesn't want somebody to say, "Hey, I like your eyes," or you look nice today, or we all crave that attention, right? But now it's like on steroids, because everybody realizes I not only get attention from my neighbor or my boss or my spouse, I can get attention from somebody in Hungary or Poland or Africa. The whole world can notice me. And of course, some people aren't affected by that, but a lot of people are.
Oh, yeah.
So it's also an age, I think, of boredom, where we want to get noticed. And this plays into what they were saying is normalcy doesn't get attention. Okay? You walk through the mall, and the guy that looks normal, that's 5'9" with short hair and regular clothes on, doesn't get noticed. But the guy with a mohawk and 14 ear piercings and the tattoos gets noticed. What else gets noticed? Homosexuals get noticed.
Yep.
Transgenders get noticed. People that think they're animals get noticed. Right? So I mean, so we're in an age where normalcy is boring. And so everybody wants to be different. Everybody wants to get attention. And the way they're getting attention is to be weird. Okay? So anyways, I think that kind of plays in. So
yeah, I feel like Forrest is pretty close to that with his, love of self. And also Annabelle saying, I think, therefore I am God.
Yeah, there you go.
Yes, indeed.
And we'll do a little playoff on that in here in just a moment as well. The other thing, keep in mind, is while the human world is kind of going wacky right now, I think we're in the zeitgeist of confusion. We're in the zeitgeist of anxiety. People are waiting, is there going to be another school shooting? Is there going to be another, catastrophe or terrorism attack? Yeah, world war, something going to break out, something crazy. But that's only the human element. The birds are still building nests. The fish are still swimming in the lake. Everything else in the world is very normal. The sun is still rising and setting right on pattern. The planets are still, going around. So if you look at the world, 99.99999% of the world is perfectly fine. It's just the human element. And that's what we pay all of our attention to, the human element, don't we?
Yeah.
All right. So anyways, the first segment of the program, I'll be sharing a little bit about St. Thomas Aquinas. I also want to share a quote or two from Pope Leo XIII's encyclical called Aeterni Patris. And then the second segment, we'll talk about Friedrich Nietzsche, and I'll give you a couple of his quotes, including what he meant by God is dead. And then, as I mentioned, third segment, we open it up for phone calls and your comments, especially. I have no material in the third segment, okay? So if William and Sissel and you, dear viewers, are not commenting, we're going to have nothing to talk about. Okay, so that's going to be yours. All right. So the main theme of the program is a restoration of Christian philosophy according to the mind of St. Thomas Aquinas, based on the Summa Theologia, of course. For the past 10 years, I've taught this to high school students, as I mentioned, and I just want to say that the apex of our religion is what makes Christianity unique. Are really two dogmas, and one of them is the Blessed Trinity, and the other one is the Incarnation, okay? Because no other religions other than Christianity has those two, right? Mm-hmm. You have the Trinity and you have the Incarnation. And humanity is very much tied into both of these, because with the Trinity, you have three persons in communion with each other, relations and notions between a community of persons. Okay, this is something that we share. We have intellect, we have will. Okay, so we're intricately bound up in the working of the Trinity. The Incarnation, of course, is Jesus Christ, true God and true man. And we have half of that. We have the true man part, and we aspire to be united to God. And so if you don't understand Jesus Christ, if you don't understand both his divine nature and his human nature, you're not going to understand yourself. And I think a lot of the problems in the culture today is that we have jettisoned God, and this is what Nietzsche tried to do, and we'll talk about that in the next segment. Forget about God, let's just focus on human nature, and what happens is catastrophe. All right. Let me go to our slideshow real quickly. I'm going to show you a couple of slides. And we sent out that email yesterday, and it had the clever, kind of what Annabelle was saying a moment ago, but this is a little variation of it. It says, "You think, therefore you are a philosopher." You ever thought about that? We are the only creatures that think. The angels don't even think. Okay, because the angels have infused knowledge, right? They don't think. They don't go from one thing to the next. They see kind of everything in a single glance, kind of like God does in a sense. We're the only creatures that think. Okay, so if you are a rational creature, and only rational creatures could be listening to this show, you are a philosopher, whether you know it or not. Okay, philosophy just means using our human reason to try to figure out, why we're here. What we're supposed to do, and, rules of morality and that kind of thing as well.
The study of wisdom.
Yeah, the study of wisdom, which, wisdom is one of the intellectual virtues. It's one of the highest virtues, right? All right, the next slide kind of shows here we are down below with an aspiration to get to heaven, and this is, this is the challenge. We're here, and we want to get there. Then in the third slide, I have quite a few things here. I love this picture on the left. I don't know if you show it. It's this person that's kind of floating in the air, right? And they're reaching up to the sky. They're off the ground. That's kind of the human condition. We're here, but we want to be there. We know instinctively, I think, that there is a God, that there is an afterlife, but we're here, and there's a lot of cool stuff down here as well. But we're kind of right in between. We're not angels. We're not our dog, but we have something in common with the angels and the dogs, but we're in that middle ground, which is a really interesting place to be. I like to describe our nature as being a super nature, okay, as opposed to a superman that Friedrich Nietzsche described. What makes our nature super, what makes it unique, is that we have it all, okay? We have the senses. We have the sensible appetites. We get to eat apple pie and hot dogs and pizza. The angels don't get to do that. We also get to know God like the angels can do, but the squirrels can't, all right? We get to have babies. The angels can't do that. We get to basically do everything, but not all things that every creature can do. There's some things the angels have that we don't, and there's some things that other creatures have. But we are the most complicated, the most intricate, and the most interesting creatures that exist, and that's why I call it a supernature, because we have a spark of divinity in us, made in the image and likeness of God. But we aren't God, but our goal is to unite with God. And that's why we really have to hyper focus on the nature and person of Jesus Christ, because he truly had it all. He had the divine nature, the human nature, and no other person that ever existed has had that. All right. In the next slide, John 17:3 says, "This is eternal life, to know thee, the one true God, whom Jesus Christ, whom you have sent." St. Thomas Aquinas describes eternity as knowledge of God, okay? Knowledge of God, because to know something entirely that is all good and all perfect, you are naturally going to love it. So the knowledge precedes the love of God, and ultimately we're going to fall in love with God because to know Him is to love Him, right? This is one quote from the Summa here that I have up on the screen, and this kind of describes what I was talking about in regard to supernature. Okay, what is the difference between supernature and Superman? Nietzsche thinks the ideal is to be a Superman. I would say Thomas Aquinas, although he didn't use this language, would talk about having supernature. Okay, so let me just read this real quickly. The ultimate beatitude of man consists in the use of his highest function, which is the operation of his intellect. For there resides in every man a natural desire to know the cause of any effect which he sees, and thence arises wonder in men. But if the intellect of the rational creature could not reach so far as the first cause of things, the natural desire would remain void. Okay, so keep that in mind. We'll talk about it in your comments on that in the third segment. But Thomas is saying here is that we live here below, we see all the effects of God, we like them, we're attracted to them, we think they're cool, and they make us curious. They make us wonder. They make us want to inquire as to who gave us all these things, who created that sunset, who created that sunrise, who created my pet dog, who allowed all these things to happen. And when that happens, we start to lift our minds and our soul and our spirits up to what's above, and we start have this curiosity. That's what Friedrich Nietzsche lost. He lost the sense of the divine. He threw it out, and he had no interest in it. And I think there's a reason why that happened. We'll talk about that in the next segment as well. We're already going late, I see. Real quickly, on the restoration of Christian philosophy, according to St. Thomas Aquinas, this is the encyclical that Leo XIII wrote. He said, if anyone look carefully at the bitterness of our times, and he consider earnestly the cause of these things, the cause he will find to consist in this: evil teaching about human and divine has come forth from the school of philosophers. And again, he lived in that interesting zeitgeist, that interesting age in the second half of the 19th century, where the world was trying to figure itself out. In large part, they had discarded God. People like Nietzsche and Karl Marx and these kind of philosophers said, Darwin, God doesn't even exist. And so they're like, well, what do we do if God doesn't exist? Where do we go from here? And Pope Leo XIII is saying, get back to good philosophy. All right. So here is a picture of Friedrich Nietzsche, 1844 to 1900. And we're going to talk about him in the next segment. And we're going to talk about what happens to a culture when we lose a sense of what it means to be a human being. When we lose the divine and we focus entirely on humanism, on existentialism, on atheism, okay? There's no God. It's all about me. It's all about man. What happens, I think, is what we have today. We have a culture that is entirely messed up. And it's largely to do, as Leo XIII pointed out, because of bad philosophy, people like Friedrich Nietzsche. So we'll spend our next segment talking about Friedrich Nietzsche. So we're going to take a quick break. We're going to put a little slide up and have some interesting information. Stay with us. We'll be right back with segment.
All right.
So can I talk to For all who are joining us on YouTube and Twitter and Facebook, be sure to tell your friends about this. And we are going to spend this segment talking about 19th century German existentialist, atheist, philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, who I believe, and I think most people who have studied him believe he is one of the most influential philosophers in our age today. And don't forget, after this, 15-minute segment or so, we're going to take another quick break, and then we're going to come back. And that's when we'd really appreciate you calling in and commenting, and we want to have an open discussion. I have no original material for the third segment, okay? So I'm relying on you to get us through this one. So let's go to the slideshow, if we may. And I got a picture there, Friedrich Nietzsche, 1844 to 1900. And the next slide shows the name of some of his books. And you can get a little bit of a sense of the kind of thinker he is just by the name of his books, Beyond Good and Evil, The Will to Power, Thus Spoke Zarathustra, which is one of his most famous books, The Birth of Tragedy, On the Genealogy of Morals, Of Truth and Lies in a Non-Moral Sense, okay? Let me explain real quickly an existentialist, okay? That's probably a term that you may not be familiar with. Existentialism is something that really has gained steam in the last couple hundred years, and Friedrich Nietzsche was kind of on the forefront of the existentialist movement. And existentialists basically believe that we are born with existence, but not with essence, okay? Which means that we aren't born with kind of a pre-programmed idea of what we're supposed to become, okay? As Christians, we believe that we're born children of God, okay? Now, of course, we're wounded by original sin, but then we are cleansed of that through baptism and sanctified, but that we have kind of a direction that we're expected to go. An existentialist would say, no, I make myself. I create who I am. And as you can see in our culture today, a lot of people want to create themselves as a man, even though they're a woman. They want to create themselves as an animal, even though they're a human being. And so this is why existentialism is a bit troublesome in itself. Okay, the next slide shows a little bit about Friedrich Nietzsche. His father, and I think this is very significant, and I'd like to do a little bit more digging on this. Okay, his father, Karl Ludwig Nietzsche, was the hometown Lutheran minister of their city, okay? So Nietzsche was brought up in a very conservative Christian home, okay? But his father died of a painful brain disease when Friedrich Nietzsche was 5 years old. So imagine the impact that would have. Your dad is a man of God. Your dad is preaching, on Sundays at the local church. Your dad, I presume, was a good man, right? And God takes him from you when you're 5 years old. Do you think that might cause a little bit of bitterness in a young man? I would think so. And then what if 6 months later, your only brother dies? Okay, so you have a sister and you have a brother. Your brother dies 6 months later. So this was what happened to Friedrich Nietzsche. Okay, he was described as a somber, serious, lonely child. As a youngster, he excelled in the study of Christian theology. All right, so he actually, I don't know if he liked it, but he did well in it. And theology and philosophy were like his best subjects. Later, he rejected Christianity and all religion, which he said Christianity rejected life. It rejected our natural impulses, which is interesting because one of the reasons he died and went insane at the end of his life was because he contracted syphilis from a brothel. Okay, he desired to break away from what he considered the herd mentality. He thought Christians just kind of followed the herd, and he wanted every person to make himself into his own image, of course, being an existentialist, okay? He endorsed the reevaluation of all morals, and he also wrote famously that God is dead. All right, now this is in the next slide, the actual quote from his book called The Gay Science, 1882. Of course, gay back then didn't mean what it means today. It would mean more like the happy science, right? That wasn't a thing back then, but okay. So here's what he says, and kind of take this in, because one thing about Nietzsche, he was a great writer. He was a very, very talented writer, and that's what draws a lot of people in. He was very interesting. Okay, so he said, "God is dead. God remains dead." and we have killed him. How shall we comfort ourselves, the murderers of all murderers? What was holiest and mightiest of all that the world had yet owned has bled to death under our knives. Who will wipe this blood off us? What water is there for us to clean ourselves? What festivals of atonement? What sacred games shall we have to invent? Is not the greatness of this deed too great for us? Must we ourselves not become gods simply to appear worthy of it? Okay, so notice all the theological language. Notice the atonement, the word sacred, the word gods, okay? Again, this is a guy who grew up not as a Catholic, I wish he had been Catholic, but he grew up as a Christian with a father who was a pastor of a Lutheran church, right? So what he's saying is, if in his mind God is dead, what in the world are we going to do with ourselves? Because now we have to invent new rituals. We have to invent meaning for life. We have to invent what it's all going to be about because we no longer have God as our ruling factor, okay? So this is where he's coming from. And so he had to create a whole nother religion because in his mind, I think because of the suffering he endured as a child, he could not find reason and meaning in human suffering. And so what is he going to do? If God doesn't exist, we got to create something else. So he creates this notion of the Superman, okay? The Superman is an exalted human being. It's the goal of every person, even though most people say Nietzsche didn't even become a Superman because his life was mostly a failure. People weren't even buying his books. All right? Nietzsche's concept of the Superman represents the highest principle of development of humanity. It designates the affirmation of man's full potentiality and creativity. It's the affirmation of one's fate, whether pleasurable or painful. This means saying yes to life and not to life's challenges. And by the way, there's a philosophical trend called nihilism, and nihilism basically means life is meaningless. Okay, life has no meaning. Jean-Paul Sartre was an existential nihilist, an author named Albert Camus, who wrote a book called The Stranger. They were nihilists. Okay, Nietzsche was not a nihilist. Nietzsche actually found meaning and purpose in life, but it was devoid of God. It was all about the human person. Okay, he was a humanist. He was an existentialist, and he was an atheist, unfortunately. Superman is an individual who has surpassed both the Christian morals and values of humanity and transcends pure rationality. Superman is beyond good and evil in that he recognizes that morality only exists concerning human beings. It is a person who has transcended or gone beyond good and evil by perfecting oneself, by going through what he calls amor fati, loving one's fate and destiny with a will strong enough to embrace everything one encounters in life, including suffering, pain, and sorrow. Nietzsche's Superman also embodies the concept of self-creation. Okay, there's the existentialism, by going beyond traditional Christian morality and creating a new set of rules. For Nietzsche, the Superman is a being who is able to completely affirm life, someone who says yes to everything that comes their way, a being who is able to be their own determiner of value, sculpt their characteristics and circumstances into a beautiful, empowered, ecstatic whole. All right, you see where he's going here? He has elevated man to the position of God. Okay, we are our own gods. We are the Superman, right? And there's also one of his books is called The Will to Power. This has to do with self-determination, because if you don't have God, you got to try to build up yourself as much as possible. And he says, man is something that shall be overcome. Now, I don't quite understand this. Man is a rope tied between beast and overman, a rope over an abyss. What is great in man is that he is a bridge and not an end. Now, these next two quotes are what I think some people read and say, uh-oh, this sounds kind of like National Socialism. This sounds a little Nazi-ish. This is what maybe his sister kind of grabbed onto. He says, the stronger becomes master of the weaker. Insofar as the latter cannot assert its degree of independence, here there is no mercy, no forbearance, even less a respect for laws. A declaration of war on the masses by higher men is needed. Everything that makes men soft and effeminate, that serves the end of the people or the feminine works in favor of universal suffrage, the domination of the inferior men. But we should take reprisal and bring this whole affair to light and the bar of judgment. Okay? That's a little scary, kind of scary stuff. Interestingly, he railed against effeminacy. I mentioned his dad died. He was raised by his mom, who eventually turned him over to his grandmother and her two sisters. All right, so he didn't have a brother. He had a sister, a mom, a grandmother, two aunts who were raising him. Okay, he did not, as far as I could tell, have a lot of male influence in his life, and that might not have been the best thing for a young man like Friedrich Nietzsche. All right, so he turned entirely against Christianity, of which he was raised. All right, the other thing I'll mention, and then we're going to take a quick break here and come back. Would love to have your comments. What do you think about all this? I've thrown a lot of information at you about Friedrich Nietzsche, the zeitgeist, supernature, Superman, the will to power, God is dead, all this stuff that we've been talking about. One thing I will say is Nietzsche spent the last 11 years of his life basically in a intellectual coma. He had he basically went insane. Okay, he had a case of syphilis, and so it was wrecking his body, and eventually it wrecked his mind. One of the last memories that anybody has of Friedrich Nietzsche is an interesting story that's become kind of legendary, is that he was walking the streets of Germany and he saw a man beating his horse, okay, like mercilessly beating the horse. I don't know if he beat him to death or not. Nietzsche was said to have run over to the horse and held it and said, "I know how you feel. I know how you feel." Okay, that says a lot about Friedrich Nietzsche. He knew suffering, and I don't think he ever was able to make any sense of it. So if you don't make sense of suffering and you've jettisoned God and you don't believe in God, you don't believe in mercy, you don't believe in redemption, what are you going to do? You just have to elevate yourself to something that becomes a God itself. And that pretty much is what happened to Friedrich Nietzsche. 11 years insane to end out his life, and then he died, and his sister took his writings. Of course, she was a Nazi. Many people, like I said, think that he did influence Nazism, but most people don't think that he would have been sympathetic to it himself. Okay, who knows? We don't know. He died in 1900, long before Hitler rose to power. All right, well, that is the second segment of the program, and when we come back, like I say, we are going to open it up. I got no more material, but I'd love to chat with you. If you want to call in, the phone number is 877-757-9424, 877-757-9424. Wouldn't it be great if we had a call or two? Okay, call in, let us know your thoughts. The zeitgeist of the age, Thomistic philosophy, supernature, Superman, will to power, God is dead, all these things that Nietzsche endorsed, or anything else that's on your mind. And I know William's been taking a lot of notes, and so he's going to have some comments as well. Or else comment on the social media page that you are on right now, and we will read all those comments, and we'll have a chat. And also, Sissel has brought a little bit of trivia, and we'll do that in the final 5 minutes, okay? This is Back to the Father, segment number 3, coming up right after this. All right, welcome. Decrease and you shall increase, okay?
You've been waiting to say that for a while.
I know. I've been waiting a long time to say that. And so we got a phone call, which is awesome.
Yes.
He didn't want to go on the air, but if you want to call in, we'd love to chat with you. The phone number, 877-757-9424, 877-757-9424. See, I say I'm going to decrease, and then I just keep on talking, right?
Just keep talking.
All right, so... you want to say what the phone call was about?
Absolutely. We got a phone call, and the question was just kind of elaborate a little bit more on, Nietzsche's like most popular thing is God is dead. And the gentleman calling wanted to know, was he being facetious when he said that? Was he, what was he meaning by that? Like, so if you want to go deeper into that.
Yeah. So, I would throw that out to those of you who are out there, because I explained it, and I'd love to explain it again as well. But do you remember what he said? He said, God is dead, and then he said, we have killed him. All right, so he was not being facetious. What was he saying? Nietzsche was truly an atheist, okay? So he believed that since the world, in his estimation, like God, he would have thought that this would have been, a belief of the Middle Ages and Thomas Aquinas, and this was another age where God reigned supreme, and everybody believed what he thought was a myth about this deity and this God. But now the culture has moved on, and they no longer believe in this deity. Okay, so in that sense, God is dead. Okay, they've killed him. They don't believe in him any longer. But he was not celebrating the fact that God didn't exist, which, of course, we know God does exist, but he didn't think that God existed. Rather, he was concerned because he said, what do we do now? Okay, because God did provide for all these rituals. He provided for a set of beliefs. There was the Christian, standard of morality and all these virtues. And he would have been very familiar with St. Thomas Aquinas and the teachings of Augustine. And Nietzsche was a very well-read person. But he's saying, what do we do now? It's almost like, a person, again, this may be a weird comparison, but a person who works their whole life in a job and then retires and they don't know what to do with themselves. So he's saying, we still have to have morals. We still have to have something to do. We still have to have some kind of rituals. But if God is no longer in the picture, what do we do with ourselves? Okay, and that's my best explanation. Does that make sense?
That makes sense to me. Yeah.
Yeah. So, anyways, I hope that helped out. And any other comments or anybody say anything?
Absolutely. Let me just go ahead and pull some of those up. We've got a lot of people watching and commenting, which I greatly appreciate. So we had Annabelle on one of our YouTube. In case you weren't familiar, we're actually live streaming on two different YouTube channels: the GRN channel and our Back to the Father channel.
Oh, wow.
So we're covering all of our bases. So Annabelle is on the GRN one. She says that we are in an I and me first society. Everything is iPad, iPhone. Yep, I'm waiting for the II when they can directly download to your eye.
Yeah, don't get many ideas, Sissel.
Sorry. And then she also said, what I think is who I am, and you better agree with me or you hate me, which is definitely very remnant.
Which is narcissism.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And our friend Victor is back. He made it back for today's show. And then also Lee wanted to say that she really is enjoying it, especially it being on a lunch break kind of hour, so she's able to watch it and learn some things. Which is awesome.
This is an odd hour, and I know a lot of people are watching this on a recorded basis, and so we welcome you. I know you can't comment live, but you can still, I think, leave comments even after the fact, and we can maybe go back and check those and talk on a future day. But if you are able to do this on your lunch break or at work, and it doesn't get you fired, we do appreciate it, but we do realize it is kind of an odd time. All right, let me. I know there's. Feel free to keep commenting on the social media sites. Sissel was trying to toggle back between all of them and get all the comments. If you do want to call in and talk to us on the air, you can do that if you're watching this live. 877-757-9424. 877-757-9424. My goal is to give you a lot of information, and then we can chat about it here in this last segment. So, William, what you got?
Yeah, I mean, I just jotted down everything that you said, or a lot of the things you said in the last two segments. I thought it was very interesting. One of the first things you said that, after St. Thomas Aquinas, we had this shift in philosophy and in society and culture. I think that's very true. Like I always kind of, because of in our debate club, we're debating the right to property over economic interests of the community. So I kind of always think about it in those terms. I always think of it like in the sense of property. Like, we have Thomas Aquinas's view on, well, we have a duty and we have a responsibility to give our property and give our wealth over to those who are in more need of it, because it's charitable, and we owe respect, and we have this duty towards our neighbor. And then you have the more modern philosophers like John Locke and Adam Smith and all of those who say property, everyone has the right to life, liberty, and property. And so it's like our right to it. We can do what we want with it, but it's a shift from Plato, from Aristotle, from Aquinas, from ancient and medieval times. So I like, that's kind of what I feel like going into every show we're kind of talking about. We're going from this medieval and this ancient philosophy, and we're moving to a more we're looking at modern philosophers. I think it's interesting to distinguish the two and where we've come from there.
Yeah, and with the property example you gave, it's interesting because the more conservative Catholics today, I think, would depart from Aquinas. I think you look at like the group TFP, Tradition, Family, and Property. I don't think TFP is endorsing that property is kind of common, to all people. Aquinas also said that under some circumstances, stealing is okay. If you're in need and somebody else has something and you're in dire need, he would say that there is a certain common notion of property, and that you can steal it. And I think that would be something that would surprise people in the modern age. So,
yeah, definitely.
Yeah, you definitely see this shift, and that's why I talked about these different ages. And really, you had, there's no perfect age, but if you're looking at the 13th century as kind of like the height of Christendom, where the world was largely Catholic, and the world, acted Catholic. And you had abuses, and Aquinas even believed that heretics could be turned over to the secular authorities to be put to death after being warned a time or two. And so you see some things that were a little heavy-handed, perhaps, by the Christians in the age. But after that, everything just started unraveling, and you had, René Descartes, I think therefore I am, and then you had the what's called the empiricists like Locke and Hume and Berkeley, and the rationalists like Spinoza and Leibniz, and you just everything just starting getting picked apart.
Yeah,
and then you have all these ages. The Enlightenment, I think, was particularly troublesome with people like Immanuel Kant, and just the Age of Reason, where I think reason was more important than having any kind of supernatural faith. Reason held sway.
Absolutely.
And then comes a time with Nietzsche where he's like, okay, I think we've by now pretty much done away with this God thing, but where does it leave us?
Yeah.
It leaves us with a sense of emptiness.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. When you just talk about his life, I just think, oh gosh, it shows the importance of understanding suffering, I feel like.
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
he just never understood that, and so he just tried to rationalize it, which is so sad. I mean, he clearly had a very hard first few years of his life. I mean, that's so horrible. I've lost a parent, but I was like in my 20s, and so that was very hard. But I can only imagine at that age losing the two men really in his life. That's
yeah. I feel like that kind of you hear these you hear these things all the time. These young people, relatively young people, losing someone in their family, and it kind of just messes their whole life up, and they start thinking these things like about suffering and why is this happening, and then they get these philosophies that we as Christians really we're like that's wrong, but at the same time you're kind of like. I kind of get what you're going through and why you're thinking this, even though you are wrong about it. It's I like you understand what they're going through because of the trauma.
Oh yeah, I've got a 9-year-old son who literally waits by the door for me to come home at night, and my wife says all he talks about is Daddy, and when is Daddy going to get home? And in the morning when I'm running around doing my routine, Patrick will literally follow me around the house. And no matter where I am, he is there with me, and he's staring at me, and he's commenting, and Daddy, am I going to shave one day? Am I going to be a man one day? So imagine you're a young kid, and all of a sudden, this is just ripped away from you, and you no longer have a dad, And then, Nietzsche was 5, his brother was younger. And so you imagine this cute little kid that came into your world, maybe he's 2 years old, and all of a sudden he dies. And you're like, no good God could ever allow that to happen. And I think to Sissel's point, kind of what you're implying is if somebody had been around to explain this, that good will always come from suffering.
His poor mom was probably dealing with so many other things, just trying to get their family to survive.
Yeah.
She I don't know. I would love to read a biography just about their family, because I think that's so interesting. I always like the philosophers. Their philosophy is very interesting, but I love learning about their life, I think, a little bit more, because it helps you understand where that philosophy may have come from. But who knows? She probably was very stressed, and she couldn't be that person. Since he did come from a Christian family, maybe she just was not in that mindset to be able to help him.
Yeah, and I remember we learned in one class, we'll probably cycle back to this guy, Arthur Schopenhauer, who was also a German one. He's the one that, he talked about the will to life, and that God basically tricked us by giving us these sexual attractions, and he was very,
Wait,
very...
Is he the one who hated women?
Oh, he very much disliked...
Not that I have a personal bone to pick with him, but...
Yeah, he thought the whole thing was just trickery, okay? That we just kind of want to mind our own business, but God gave us all these attractions, and all he's trying to do is create new life and keep things going, and we're just the little imbeciles that follow along our instincts, and so he rebelled against the basic instincts. Whereas Nietzsche, who was influenced by Schopenhauer, at least Nietzsche was more of an optimist. If you read some of Nietzsche's writings, he really wanted man to excel. He wanted man, he wanted man to be the best version of himself that he possibly could be. He was almost like a self-help guru, of the modern age. You go to the Barnes & Noble or whatever, and you see all this whole section of how to improve yourself. That's really what Nietzsche was doing. He was trying to raise man up to the best level that he possibly could be, but without any reference to God.
Right,
and
exactly.
so it always falls flat.
Yeah, exactly.
You can never achieve that.
You can't do that because it's not. We're not God, and we can't get there without His help. We can't. We're supposed to strive for perfection and be perfect, but you're not going to be able to get there without someone higher than yourself. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. All the more reason, we've got to teach this stuff. I think, if you are, I mentioned before, you think, therefore you are a philosopher, okay? You are a rational creature if you're watching this right now, which means that you've been given intellect and will, and you're made to the image and likeness of God, who is pure intellect and pure will. But what creates us in having a super nature, as I like to talk about it, is that we have to come to know the spiritual realities through the physical. Okay, everything that we come to know about God is through our experience in the human life, through what we learn through our senses. And that's just the nature of who we are, and we can't limit it to the temporal life like Friedrich Nietzsche tried to do. Yeah. Okay, so we are down...
one more quick thing. I know we need to move into trivia, but one more quick thing I wanted to note on is I think this philosophy that Friedrich Nietzsche has, as I think about it a little bit more, it really does kind of relate with this transgender movement that we see, these people thinking that they can be the opposite sex, and it's like, well, no, because you're trying to elevate yourself to be someone that you want to be, but it's not truth. It's not who you were created to be. It's this idea of a Superman, as I think about it a little bit more.
Yeah, exactly. They would say, "What are you talking about? Who you're created to be? Who you make yourself to be?" Right? That's what Nietzsche would say.
Yeah.
When I talk to my son, I often will say, "I can't wait to see the kind of man God wants you to be." Okay, so there's a certain teleological aspect of that, is that you're becoming what you're meant to be, rather than becoming who you want to become. Who you want to fashion yourself as. Yeah, that's the difference.
I see like this. It kind of like all links together. These modern philosophers, they seem to always want to kind of push away from authority, and but like authority is not a bad thing, but they want to pull away from it and be themselves. They just want to be left alone, but you can't. You need some standards and you need some authority in a society.
Yeah.
So I
Amen.
just think it's interesting.
Before we get to trivia, are there any other comments that you want to mention?
Scott Rogie on Facebook said, "I'm a creature, but I'm not so sure I'm rational." So I was like, that's fair.
Yeah.
But I think that's about it. I did put in the chat box an opportunity for people. I think a lot of these people probably are on our email list, but I put a link there for you to be able to sign up for it so that you can never miss a show. And we will earlier in the week send the topic. And if we're referencing the Summa a lot, we'll probably try to put those articles as well. So you can have all the materials beforehand so you're caught up. So just so you know, it's a good thing to be on the email list, as well as the fact that a few minutes before we'll send out the actual link to the broadcast, so it'll be super easy for you.
Yeah, and all the philosophers we talk about in the second segment, they won't all be bad. There are some that are good. I mean, a guy like Aristotle and Plato and Socrates, these are all very good, and they all have an element of good. There's part of, first time I read Nietzsche in college, I loved him. I mean, who doesn't like that sense of make something of your life and do your best and become the Superman? And he was a very interesting writer. So there was some good stuff with him, but fundamentally he was misguided because he threw God out the door. All right, we are going to have a few minutes of trivia here at the end of the show, and we invite you to join us for it on Back to the Father. I do want to thank everybody for watching today and making this reboot I think it was a success.
Yes, absolutely.
Agreed.
All right, who's ready for some trivia? Because,
All set.
I didn't actually need the visual reference, but okay, thank you. I'm glad that you are ready.
Hands up.
We have, I have a few questions about Nietzsche and also about Germany.
Oh, okay.
To kind of like balance it out. And I want to thank our other intern, James, helped me find some of these today while I was running around like a crazy person putting up lights. He was finding some of this trivia for me. So let's start out with who was, and you all did a little more research on Nietzsche than I did, so you may already know all these things.
All
but
right.
Who was he named after?
The Friedrich, wasn't it the emperor, like the king or something? Because his middle name was Wilhelm.
Yes, it was King Friedrich Wilhelm IV of Prussia, and he was Friedrich Wilhelm, but he dropped Wilhelm later on.
It.
Yeah, he did. I don't know if he didn't want to be associated with the king. He was, and I think apparently it was like around the 49th birthday of this king or something happened. They had like similarities, and that's why he got named after that. So 1 point to Dave. What was Nietzsche an amateur at, or kind of working at?
Poetry.
What hobby? That's your vote. Dave's got to vote for poetry. William's thinking hard over there. Anyone else in the comments?
Like a hobby he had? Is that
yeah,
what we're looking for?
It was something like a skill he was working on, you know?
Okay. I'll go with creative writing.
Creative writing. Okay, I want to see if anyone else is going to comment and take one out. We do have a delay.
He studied philology in college.
Yeah, he did study philology. Yeah,
which is like the study of words, and he was a real wordsmith.
So that's a good guess then.
And I think there might have been some music as well.
So you both are wrong. Dave, okay, all right. Scott Rogie said piano, and I'm going to let Scott take the point on this one. It was amateur composer.
Oh, okay.
So he voiced piano and violin. And this was around 1858 when this happened, and he did start compose music. Now, music has been mocked as the worst people have ever heard.
Oh, really?
And people like Richard Wagner said that Richard's pieces were the most undelightful and most unmusical that they have faced in a long time, which is really brutal.
That's hard to take.
That's really brutal.
And Wagner was like really famous too.
Wagner, if I remember correctly, he had an interesting end of his life too. I think he went insane as well.
I think didn't he have some like Nazi sympathies or something?
Oh, I'm sure. I feel because didn't he have a sister too who was also a composer?
Yeah, I think so. Probably
anyhow, there's your little fact. He was not a good composer apparently.
Okay.
I hope someone has that so that you could like listen to it. What was? Hold on a second. Okay, Nietzsche. Did he ever get married? Nietzsche.
He had a very serious relationship, but I don't think he got married.
What do you think, William?
I think Dave's probably right on this one. He's probably researched it more than I have.
He made 3 attempts at proposing to Lou Salome, but was rejected.
Oh, yeah. He had a sad
she
life.
thought that marriage was a violation.
Oh, okay.
And she viewed him as a friend.
All
so
right.
he got friends.
Oh, he had that. We can just be friends line?
Yes.
Oh,
all right,
that's painful.
Yeah, I know. Really rough. Let's switch a little bit into some German trivia. What are the colors of the German flag?
Oh, boy.
Orange and
white.
red. I'm trying
There's
to
3 colors, by the way.
Green, orange, red.
That's Dave's locked in for green, orange, red. What have you got?
Green, orange, white. I don't know.
I'm gonna. Yeah, actually, neither of you.
We didn't get any of them.
You didn't get it right.
Oh, yellow.
No, it's black, red, gold.
Oh,
I guess they
okay.
consider that orangey
right.
color more of a
Yeah.
red than
Okay.
at least according to this article that we read.
Yeah. All right.
All right, and okay, what's German city has the largest seaport?
I have no idea. I'm going to say Munich. I don't know my German.
That's okay.
I only know the only city I know in Germany is Berlin. That's it.
Okay, well, it
So-
is Hamburg.
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 Okay.
All right, and last question. Now, I feel like Dave probably is the one who's going to more likely, sorry, William, know this one.
Okay.
Lots of
maybe
confidence in you there, William.
Sorry. Which German basketball player is the only one to play for a single NBA franchise for 21 seasons?
I know this.
Oh.
Dirk Nowitzki.
Yes, William. I didn't know if you knew basketball
Yes.
that well.
No, I do know that one.
Oh,
Yeah.
by the way, I would like to say Scott actually got the color of the flag.
Yeah, I was trying to picture like their
your
soccer
head.
team or their flag. Yeah. So now that you say it, it makes sense. So it's gold, black, and was it red?
Yes.
Yeah, gold, black, red.
Gold,
okay.
black, red. So those were kind of the ones that I had. I had some other ones, but I wanted to more ask you this one question is that it says that he was hoping to become a minister. Is that true? Have you heard of that?
That Friedrich Nietzsche was probably young and early in his life because, when you're an atheist, it typically doesn't jive with wanting to be a minister.
You're going to want to do.
But I would think that early in his life, he probably did want to, and I'm sure his mom wanted him to carry on like his father.
Sure.
But I don't think after like he went to college, he would have ever thought about that.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. Well, that's all the trivia I have for today. You'll hopefully learn something. At least if nothing else, we now know the colors of the German flag, hopefully. So next time that you're on one of those trivia shows,
Yeah.
we've got you set.
Make sure you credit us.
Yeah, make sure you credit back to the father for that one.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, William. Thanks, Sissel. And thank you for watching this first episode of the reboot of Back to the Father, a production of the Guadalupe Radio Network. God bless you.
Thanks for joining us for Back to the Father. And don't forget, the glory of God is the human person fully alive. If you have comments about the show, email Dave Palmer at grnonline.com.